On a quiet afternoon in the small town of Brooksville, Emily Johnson walked down the familiar streets, her cane tapping gently against the pavement as she made her way forward. By her side, as always, was her guide dog, Max. He was a large, strong German shepherd, his coat a mix of golden browns and blacks. Max moved with confidence, guiding Emily with calm precision, just like he had done every day for the past few years. To anyone who saw them walking together, they looked like any other pair, a blind woman and her loyal companion. But there was something special about Emily and Max that no one knew. To the people passing by, they were just another couple in the crowd, blending in with the rest of the world. No one noticed the quiet strength that lay in their partnership. No one saw the bond that went beyond mere companionship. Emily's eyes, though calm and gentle, hid years of struggle and perseverance. Her blindness didn't define her. It was the way she carried herself, the strength in her steps, the confidence in her voice that made her who she was. But even more than that, it was Max who had helped her become the woman she was today. As they walked through the park, Emily could feel the sun warming her face, and the sound of children laughing echoed in the distance. She smiled softly, even though she couldn't see the children playing. She didn't need to. Max's every movement, every slight shift in his posture, gave her a sense of the world around her. He was her eyes. And she trusted him more than anything else in her life. Yet, today was different. Emily couldn't put her finger on it, but something in the air felt off. Max had been acting a little more alert than usual. His ears perked up at the slightest sound, his body tense with each passing person. Emily could feel the difference in him, but she didn't worry. Max had always been protective, ever since the first day they had met. He was her protector, her guide, her closest friend. But what Emily didn't know was that today, Max's protective instincts would be put to the test in a way neither of them expected. As they walked down the sidewalk, passing by a group of bikers who had parked their motorcycles by the side of the road, Emily noticed the sudden change in the air. The loud rumble of the engines cut through the usual sounds of the street, and the bikers' deep voices echoed as they joked among themselves. Emily could feel the eyes of the bikers on her. She didn't know what they were thinking, but she could sense that they weren't just looking. They were judging. Emily had felt that many times before, the way people looked at her, the way they pitied her, or worse, the way they assumed she couldn't do anything for herself. Max, sensing the change in her mood, stopped walking for a moment. Emily's hand rested gently on his back, and she whispered softly, "It's okay, Max. Let's keep walking." Max gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and they continued their journey. But the bikers weren't done watching them. One of the men, the leader of the group, stepped forward, a grin spreading across his face. His eyes locked onto Emily and Max, and with a voice full of mockery, he called out, "Hey, lady. You lost or something? Need a guide to help you around here?" The other bikers laughed, their deep voices rumbling like thunder as they watched the woman with the dog. Emily's heart sank. She could feel the sting of their words, but she didn't let it show. She had faced this kind of thing before. People thought they could make fun of her because she was blind. They assumed she couldn't fight back. They didn't know the strength she had, the power she carried within herself, or the special bond she had with Max. Max's muscles tensed. Emily felt the slight shift in his stance and the subtle tightening of his body. He was ready to protect her. She didn't need to say anything. She trusted Max completely, and she knew he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The leader of the bikers, seeing the way Max had positioned himself between Emily and the rest of the group, took a few steps closer. "What's the matter, dog? You gonna bite me?" he sneered, moving in closer to test Max's reaction. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her cane. She could sense that the situation was about to escalate, but she refused to be intimidated. She had spent too many years learning to stand her ground, even when the world seemed to think she was weak. With Max by her side, she knew she could handle whatever came her way. The bikers weren't done, though. They continued to jeer, laughing at her blindness, at the dog who stood protectively in front of her. It was the same old game, people thinking they could push her around because she couldn't see. But they had no idea who she was. And they certainly didn't know who Max was. Emily kept walking, feeling her heart race a little faster, but she stayed calm. Her cane tapped the ground with steady rhythm, guiding her forward. She could hear the bikers growing louder, their laughter echoing in her ears. The leader of the group shouted something else, but Emily couldn't make out the words. That was when Max did something unexpected. Without warning, he barked loudly, his deep voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. The bikers froze, their laughter faltering for a moment. Max's bark wasn't just a warning. It was a command. He was telling them to stay back. And his voice was enough to make even the toughest biker think twice. Emily's grip on Max's harness tightened slightly, and she felt the subtle shift in his muscles as he prepared for whatever might come next. She knew Max wasn't just any guide dog. He wasn't like the other dogs she had known. He had been trained for something more. But what that something was, she wasn't ready to reveal just yet. As they continued walking, Emily could feel the bikers' eyes on her, but they didn't dare approach. They didn't know it, but they had just stepped into a world they didn't understand. And today, they were about to learn that appearances could be deceiving. Max wasn't just a guide dog. There was much more to him than that. But the bikers, still oblivious to who he really was, would find out soon enough. What they didn't know was that Max wasn't just a loyal companion, he was a protector, trained in ways they could never imagine. And he had been waiting for this moment. As Emily and Max continued down the sidewalk, the bikers slowly dispersed, realizing they had pushed too far. Emily smiled to herself, knowing Max had handled the situation, as always, with grace and strength. But she also knew that today was different. Today, Max's true nature was about to be revealed. And it would change everything. Across the street, the roar of loud motorcycles filled the air, breaking the peaceful calm of the afternoon. The bikers sped down the road, engines growling as they cut through the streets, laughing loudly, not caring about anyone around them. Their leather jackets gleamed in the sun, and their heavy boots made each step sound like thunder. They were a group of rough men, full of confidence and power, who thought the world owed them respect simply because of their looks and attitude. They didn't care who they offended or who they hurt. They believed they could do whatever they wanted. As they neared the crosswalk where Emily was walking with Max, one of the bikers glanced over. His eyes narrowed, and a smirk spread across his face. He slowed his bike just enough to make sure the others saw what he was doing. He looked at Emily, who was walking steadily down the street, her cane tapping softly against the ground, and he made a rude gesture. "Hey, blind lady!" he shouted. His voice was thick with mockery. The others in the group laughed, their deep voices like a chorus of ridicule. They didn't care that Emily couldn't see them. To them, her blindness made her an easy target. They saw her cane, the guide dog by her side, and they thought they could take advantage of that. They saw her as weak, as someone who didn't belong in their world of power and loud engines. One of the bikers revved his engine loudly, sending the sound echoing across the street. The noise was deafening, almost as if he was trying to scare her, trying to make her flinch or show fear. But Emily didn't flinch. She couldn't see him, but she could feel the tension in the air, the way the ground vibrated beneath her feet. She could hear their laughter, the teasing tone in their voices, and she knew what was happening. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to make fun of her, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Max, her loyal guide dog, immediately noticed the change in the air. His ears stood straight up, and his body went tense. Emily could feel the change in him too. He had been calm and focused up until this point, but now, there was something different. He wasn't just walking beside her anymore, he was standing guard, watching the bikers closely. The bikers didn't stop there. They circled around Emily, riding their motorcycles slowly, as if they were surrounding her. Each biker took turns revving their engines and driving close to her, their loud bikes roaring in her ears. They were playing a dangerous game, pushing closer and closer, testing to see how much they could get away with. Emily could feel their presence. She could hear the sound of their engines as they drove around her, the smell of gasoline filling the air. She knew they were trying to intimidate her, to make her feel small, like she was in their way. But what they didn't know was that Emily had faced this kind of thing before. She had been in situations where people thought they could take advantage of her because of her blindness. She had heard the whispers, felt the stares, and experienced the pity in people's voices. She had been underestimated her whole life, and she had learned to handle it. But this time, it wasn't just about her. This time, it was about Max, too. Max wasn't just a dog. He was trained to protect her, and he wouldn't stand for anyone treating her like this. The bikers continued their game, taunting her, trying to make her feel helpless. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard, slowed his bike to a crawl and shouted, "What's the matter, lady? Can't see the fun in this? Maybe you should go back to your little corner and stay out of the way." His words were cruel, meant to hurt. They didn't just mock her blindness, they mocked her entire existence. Emily's hand gripped her cane tighter. She had heard this before. She had faced similar people in the past, people who thought they could make her feel small, people who thought they could get away with anything just because she couldn't see them. But Emily wasn't small. She wasn't afraid. She was strong. And Max? Max was stronger than anyone realized. Max, sensing Emily's growing frustration, took a step forward. His body was completely still, his eyes locked on the bikers, who were starting to grow bolder, circling her more closely now. His tail was tucked slightly under his body, his stance showing that he was ready to act. Emily could feel his muscles tense under her hand, and she knew it was time for the bikers to stop testing their luck. But the bikers didn't stop. The leader of the group, the one who had first yelled at her, revved his engine again, louder this time, causing the ground to shake. "Come on, blind lady. You don't scare us. You should just keep walking and forget about us." His laughter mixed with the sound of the roaring motorcycles, like a cruel anthem. The other bikers joined in, their laughter growing louder. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought they could make her back down, make her feel afraid. But Emily wasn't backing down. She couldn't see them, but she didn't need to. She had Max by her side, and that was enough. Max had been trained for situations like this. He had been taught to protect, to guide, to defend. He had been through rigorous training in places where danger was real, and now he was standing between Emily and the bikers, ready to do whatever it took to keep her safe. The leader of the group, sensing that Max was more than just a normal dog, pulled his bike closer. He was testing Max now, seeing how far he could push the dog. "You think that dog's going to protect you? You think he's going to stop us?" he sneered. His voice was full of arrogance, full of belief that no one, not even a dog, could stand up to him. Max growled low in his throat, a sound that sent a chill down Emily's spine. It wasn't a growl of fear, it was a warning. Max wasn't afraid. And neither was Emily. She had lived her whole life facing challenges that other people couldn't even imagine. She had never let fear control her, and today was no different. But she also knew that the bikers weren't going to stop until they got a reaction from her. They were pushing her to show fear, to give them what they wanted. She took a deep breath, focusing on Max. She knew he was ready. She could feel it in the way he stood, the way his muscles were coiled, ready to spring into action if necessary. But for now, she had to stay calm. She couldn't let them see her shake, couldn't let them know how much their words hurt. Because if they saw even a crack in her confidence, they would use it against her. The bikers circled closer, trying to intimidate her further. They were laughing, mocking her, pushing her to the edge. But Emily knew that the longer they kept going, the closer they were getting to finding out just who Max really was and what he was capable of. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Max wasn't just a dog. He was more than that. And the bikers were about to find out exactly what he was trained to do. The group of bikers circled closer, their laughter growing louder, as if they believed that the closer they got to Emily, the more control they would have. They taunted her, making cruel jokes, all while revving their powerful bikes. The sound of the engines echoed in the street, making the air vibrate with their noise. But through it all, Emily stood still, her face calm and composed, as if she wasn't being surrounded by a group of aggressive strangers. She wasn't scared, and she wasn't flustered. She had seen situations like this before. Her fingers brushed gently through Max's fur, offering him comfort and giving him a subtle signal. She didn't need to say a word, Max understood. He had been her partner for years, and in all that time, they had learned to communicate without speaking. A slight touch on his head, a shift in her posture, was enough for Max to know what was needed. The bond they shared was something special, something that went beyond the typical relationship between a person and their dog. They were a team, a partnership built on trust, and Max was always ready to protect Emily when the situation called for it. As Emily's fingers brushed Max's fur, he reacted immediately. His ears twitched, the small movement enough to tell Emily that he was alert and focused. His body stiffened ever so slightly, a warning sign that he was ready for whatever came next. Emily could feel the change in him, and she knew that Max was preparing for something. He wasn't just her guide dog anymore. In that moment, Max was her protector, and anyone who crossed that line would soon find out just how capable he was. One of the bikers, a tall man with tattoos covering his arms, got off his bike. His boots hit the pavement with a hard thud as he swaggered toward Emily, his smirk wide and full of arrogance. He didn't see Max as a threat. To him, Max was just a dog, nothing more than an accessory to Emily's disability. He thought he could intimidate her, mock her, and scare her into submission. "Hey, lady," the biker called out as he approached. "Why don't you just take your dog and get out of here? This street's not for people like you." His words were meant to sting, to make Emily feel small and helpless. He was trying to break her down, trying to get her to react. But Emily didn't budge. She stood tall, her chin slightly raised, showing that she wasn't going to let him win. Max, who had been standing still next to Emily, suddenly moved. It wasn't a random movement. It wasn't a casual shift in position. Max took a deliberate step forward, placing himself between Emily and the biker. His posture was straight, his body tense with purpose. His movements were controlled, precise, as if he had done this many times before. The biker, who had been walking toward Emily, froze in his tracks. He looked down at Max, his smirk faltering for a brief moment. But he quickly regained his confidence and took another step forward, determined to show Emily that he wasn't afraid of a dog. "What's this, huh?" the biker sneered. "You think a dog can protect you?" Max didn't growl, but there was a deep, steady calmness in his stance. His eyes never left the biker, and his body stayed poised, ready to move at a moment's notice. Emily could feel the tension in the air, the standoff between Max and the biker, and she knew this wasn't just a simple confrontation. This was a test, a challenge to see who would back down first. The biker took another step forward, his boots crunching against the pavement. He was close now, so close that Emily could feel the heat from his body and hear the rustle of his leather jacket. Max, however, didn't back down. He stood firm, his muscles taut and ready. Emily's hand stayed lightly resting on his head, offering him reassurance, but she didn't need to say anything. Max knew what to do. At that moment, the biker reached out with his hand, as if he was going to push Max away. It was a careless move, one that showed he had no idea who he was dealing with. But Max wasn't a normal dog, and he wasn't going to let anyone harm his partner. As the biker's hand came closer, Max reacted. In one smooth, swift motion, Max took a step forward, his body moving with lightning speed. Before the biker could even touch him, Max raised his head slightly, his body shifting to block the biker's path. Max wasn't just standing in front of Emily, he was asserting his presence. His stance was so powerful, so precise, that the biker couldn't help but hesitate. He had expected a dog to back down, to run away, but Max wasn't just a dog. He was trained to handle situations like this. The biker, caught off guard, stopped in his tracks. He looked down at Max, his expression shifting from arrogance to confusion. He didn't understand. This wasn't the reaction he had expected from a blind woman's dog. Max wasn't showing fear. He wasn't cowering. Instead, Max was standing strong, alert, and fully aware of what was happening. Emily could sense the shift in the biker's attitude. He wasn't sure what to make of the situation anymore. His eyes flicked from Max to Emily, trying to figure out how he should respond. But Emily stood tall, unfazed. She had known that Max would take care of her, that he would protect her when it mattered most. And now, the biker was realizing that he had underestimated her, and more importantly, he had underestimated Max. The other bikers, who had been circling around, began to slow their bikes, unsure of what was happening. They had expected the confrontation to be easy. They had thought they could intimidate Emily into backing down. But now, they saw something different. They saw Max standing his ground, and they saw the calmness in Emily's posture. For a moment, everything felt still. The sound of the motorcycle seemed to fade into the background, and the world slowed down. Emily's heart was calm. She trusted Max completely, and she knew that he would handle the situation. But she also knew that the bikers weren't finished. They hadn't given up yet. The tension in the air was thick, and the bikers were starting to realize that they weren't dealing with an ordinary blind woman and her dog. There was more to Max than they had thought. They didn't know it yet, but the full story was about to unfold. As the biker who had approached them took a step back, his eyes still locked on Max, the others looked at each other, uncertain. They had come to mock, to cause trouble, but now, they were faced with something they hadn't expected. The biker who had been the loudest suddenly stopped laughing. His smirk faded into a look of doubt. Max had proven that he wasn't just any dog, he was something more, and the bikers were beginning to realize that they might have made a big mistake by challenging him. But they didn't know the full story yet. They hadn't seen what Max could truly do. And it was only a matter of time before they found out. The biker, now standing just inches from Max, smirked, confident that he had the upper hand. He reached out, expecting to push the dog away, maybe give him a quick shove. But just as his hand came within reach, something happened, something that no one expected. Max's body, which had been perfectly still moments before, exploded into action. In one smooth, controlled movement, he lunged forward with incredible speed, his muscles rippling as he propelled himself toward the biker. It wasn't a wild or uncontrolled movement, nor was it an act of aggression. No, this was something entirely different. Max was not just reacting out of instinct, he was executing a move that had been drilled into him over years of intense training. The biker's eyes widened in surprise as Max's body slammed into him, knocking him off balance. The biker stumbled back, caught completely off guard, his feet skidding across the pavement. The rest of the group, who had been standing nearby, frozen in disbelief, now stared at the scene in shock. Their grins, which had been plastered across their faces just moments ago, disappeared entirely. Max had done exactly what he had been trained to do: protect, defend, and neutralize the threat. The bikers couldn't understand what had just happened. This wasn't the response they had expected from a blind woman's dog. Max stood tall in front of Emily, his eyes fixed on the bikers. His stance was calm, controlled, and yet every muscle in his body was ready for the next move. It wasn't anger or fury in his gaze, it was something much more powerful. It was the focused intensity of a highly trained animal, one that had been prepared for moments like this. Max wasn't just any dog, he wasn't the playful pet that most people assumed he was. He was something more, something far more dangerous when provoked. The biker who had been knocked off balance struggled to regain his footing. He held up his hands as if to signal defeat, but it was too late. He had already made the mistake of underestimating Max and Emily, and now, the situation was no longer in his control. Emily, who had remained calm and composed throughout the entire ordeal, now stepped forward, her voice breaking the silence. "You're lucky Max is holding back," she said firmly, her words carrying a weight that seemed to hang in the air. "He's not just a guide dog, he's a former police canine, trained to take down people like you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. The bikers looked at each other, their eyes wide with shock. They had thought they were dealing with a vulnerable, defenseless woman and her dog. They had no idea what Max was capable of. They hadn't known who he really was or what he had been trained to do. Emily's words hung in the air, and the realization started to sink in. The bikers, once so full of bravado, now looked uncertain. They had been toying with someone they didn't understand, someone they thought they could intimidate. But now they knew they had made a huge mistake. Max wasn't just a guide dog who helped Emily navigate the world, he was a former police canine, trained in tactics and techniques designed to subdue dangerous criminals. He wasn't just an animal, he was a skilled protector, a partner to Emily in ways they could never have imagined. The biker who had gotten closest to Emily took a step back, his face pale as the full realization hit him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the awkwardness of having crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The rest of the group looked at each other, their expressions now a mixture of fear and confusion. They didn't know how to respond. They had tried to intimidate someone they thought was vulnerable, and now, the tables had turned. They were the ones who were vulnerable, standing face to face with a dog who had been trained to take down people like them. Max stood there, unmoving, his gaze unblinking. His stance was still strong, but there was no aggression in his posture, only quiet confidence. It wasn't the first time he had faced danger, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Emily knew that Max had been through far worse situations than this one. He had seen action as a police canine, where his skills were put to the test every day. But here, in this moment, he was holding back. He wasn't going to attack unless it was absolutely necessary. His job wasn't to cause harm, it was to protect. And right now, he was doing exactly that, keeping Emily safe from people who had no respect for others. The bikers, still recovering from the shock of what had just happened, finally started to realize the gravity of the situation. They had been the aggressors, the ones who had started the trouble. But now, they were the ones on the defensive. And they knew that if they pushed further, if they made one wrong move, Max wouldn't hesitate to act. He had been trained for moments like this, where every second counted, where every move had to be calculated. The bikers were no match for Max's training. One of the bikers, the one who had first taunted Emily, muttered something under his breath, but his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. "We didn't know, we didn't realize," he said, his words trailing off. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at Max, her expression softening just a little. "He's been through more than you could ever imagine," she said, her voice steady. Max isn't just a dog. He's a trained professional, and when you mess with him, you mess with someone who has been through the toughest situations. So you'd better think twice before you try anything again. The bikers, realizing that they were outmatched, slowly started to back away. The confidence they had come in with was gone now, replaced by hesitation and fear. They had been up against something they didn't understand, and now they had learned the hard way. Max, the guide dog they had mocked and underestimated, was far more than they had ever expected. As the bikers turned and got back on their bikes, they no longer had the same swagger they had started with. They didn't rev their engines loudly, instead, they left quietly, no words exchanged, no further insults hurled. The street, which had been filled with the roar of engines and the sound of mockery, now felt still and calm again. Emily, who had remained calm throughout the entire